Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's installation of Eventide Tales. My name is Chris Edwards. I'm the artistic director here at Eventide Theater Company, and I want to welcome Toby Wilson, who is the director of our Eventide Tales program. He's got a wonderful lineup of readings for us today. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you are returning to our Eventide Tales stage, welcome back. For those of you who are new to our program or who have been tuning into our program consistently, thank you to both of you for joining us. We want to encourage you to please consider supporting our programming here at Eventide Theater Company, including the Eventide Tales program. You can do so by making a donation by texting the number 44321 with the letters ETC. That's our theater's initials. So ETC, text it to 44321. That'll give you a secure link where you can actually go and make a donation online. If you prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, you can go to the old-fashioned internet, to our old-fashioned webpage, and click on the link there, where there are options to donate as well. And we do encourage you to continue supporting all of our programming here, not just Eventide Tales, but the season of programming that we have coming up, which we have just recently announced, and I'll share a little bit more with you later. With that being said, I want to turn things over to Toby to bring us into our program and to thank some of our sponsors.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this program. We really do cherish having an audience of all of you to listen to these great tales told by wonderful actors. Before we begin, I just want to let you know that this program is supported in part by grants from the Harwich, Falmouth, and Brewster Cultural Councils, local agencies which are supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. And we really appreciate all of the support and patronage that you have supplied us with. And without further ado, I'm going to begin our program for today. Our first story is by an English author named H.H. Munro. H.H. Munro is better known by the pen name Saki and was a British writer whose witty, mischievous, and sometimes macabre stories satirized Edwardian society and culture. He is considered by English teachers and scholars as a master of the short story and is often compared to O. Henry and Dorothy Parker, and he himself was an influence on A. A. Milne, Noel Coward, and P.G. Wodehouse. In this story, Tobermory, a languid country weekend is thrown into confusion when one of the guests teaches the family cat how to talk. This is not a good thing. The story will be read by Cleo Zanni.
Tobermory by H.H. Munro, a.k.a. Saki. It was a chill, rain-washed afternoon of a late August day, that indefinite season when partridges are still in security or cold storage, and there is nothing to hunt, unless one is bounded on the north by the Bristol Channel, in which case one may lawfully gallop after fat red stags. Lady Blemley's house party was not bounded on the north by the Bristol Channel, hence there was a full gathering of her guests round the tea table on this particular afternoon. The undisguised, open-mouthed attention of the entire party was fixed on the homely, negative personality of Mr. Cornelius Sapin. Of all her guests, he was the one who had come to Lady Blemley with the vaguest reputation. Someone had said he was clever, and he had gotten his invitation in the modest expectation, on the part of his hostess, that some portion, at least, of his cleverness would be contributed to the general entertainment. Until tea time that day, she had been unable to discover in one direction, if any, his cleverness lay. He was neither a wit, nor a croquet champion, a hypnotic force, nor a begetter of amateur theatricals. Neither did his exterior suggest the sort of man in whom women are willing to pardon a generous measure of mental deficiency. And now he was claiming to have launched on the world a discovery beside which the invention of gunpowder, of the printing press, and of steam locomotion were inconsiderable trifles. Science had made bewildering strides in many directions during recent decades, but this thing seemed to belong to the domain of miracle rather than to scientific achievement. "And do you really ask us to believe," Sir Wilfrid was saying, "that you have discovered a means for instructing animals in the art of human speech, and that dear old Tobermory has proved your first successful pupil?" "It is a problem in which I have worked for the last 17 years, said Mr. Apin, "but only during the last 8 or 9 months have I been rewarded with glimmerings of success. Of course, I have experimented with thousands of animals, but latterly only with cats, those wonderful creatures which have assimilated themselves so marvelously with our civilization, while retaining all their highly developed feral instincts. Here and there, among cats, one comes across an outstanding superior intellect, just as one does among the rock of human beings. And when I made the acquaintance of Tobermory a week ago, I saw at once that I was in contact with the beyond cat of extraordinary intelligence. I had gone far along the road to success in recent experiments, but with Tobermory, as you call him, I have reached the goal." Professor Apin concluded his remarkable statement in a voice which he strove to divest of a triumphant inflection. No one said "rats," though Clovis's lips moved in a monosyllabic contortion, which probably invoked those rodents of disbelief. "Then do you mean to say," asked Miss Resker after a slight pause, "that you have taught Tobermory to say and understand easy sentences of one syllable?" "Oh, my dear Miss Resker," said the wonder worker patiently, "one teaches little children and savages and backward adults in that piecemeal fashion. When one has once solved the problem of making a beginning with an animal of highly developed intelligence, one has no need for those halting methods. Tobermory can speak our language with perfect correctness." "Well, hadn't we better have the cat in and judge for ourselves?" suggested Lady Blemley. Sir Wilfrid went in search of the animal, and the company settled themselves down to the languid expectation of witnessing some more or less adroit drawing-room ventriloquism. In a minute, Sir Wilfrid was back in the room, his face white beneath its tan, and his eyes dilated with excitement. "My God, it's true!" His agitation was unmistakably genuine, and his hair started forwards in a thrill of wakened interest. Collapsing into an armchair, he continued breathlessly. "I found him dozing in the smoking room and called out to him to come for his tea. He blinked at me in his usual way, and I said, 'Come on, old boy, don't keep us waiting.' And by Gad, he drawled out in a most horribly natural voice that he'd come when he dashed well pleased. I nearly jumped out of my skin." Professor Apin had preached to absolutely incredulous hearers. Sir Wilfrid's statement carried instant conviction. A Babel-like chorus of startled exclamation rose, amid which the scientist sat mutely enjoying the first fruit of his stupendous discovery. In the midst of the clamour, Tobermory entered the room and made his way with velvet tread and studied unconcern across the group seated round the tea table. A sudden hush of awkwardness and constraint fell on the company. Somehow there seemed an element of embarrassment in addressing on equal terms a domestic cat of acknowledged dental ability. "Will you have some milk, Tobermory?" asked Lady Blemley in a rather strained voice. "I don't mind if I do," was the response, couched in a tone of even indifference. A shiver of suppressed excitement went through the listeners, and Lady Blemley might be excused for pouring out the saucerful of milk rather unsteadily. "Oh, I'm afraid I've spilt a good deal of it," she said apologetically. "After all, it's not my carpet," was Tobermory's rejoinder. Another silence fell on the group, and then Miss Risker, in her best district visitor manner, asked if the human language had been difficult to learn. Tobermory looked squarely at her for a moment, and then fixed his gaze serenely in the middle distance. It was obvious that boring questions lay outside his scheme of life. "Well, what do you think of human intelligence?" asked Mavis Pellington lamely. "Of whose intelligence in particular?" asked Tobermory coldly. "Oh, well, mine, for instance," said Mavis with a feeble laugh. "You put me in an embarrassing position," said Tobermory, whose tone and attitude certainly did not suggest a shred of embarrassment. "When your inclusion in this house party was suggested, Sir Wilfrid protested that you were the most brainless woman of his acquaintance, and that there was a wide distinction between hospitality and the care of the feeble-minded. Lady Blemley replied that your lack of brain power was the precise quality which had earned you your invitation, as you were the only person she could think of who might be idiotic enough to buy their old car. You know, the one they call the Envy of Sisyphus, because it goes quite nicely uphill if you push it." Lady Blemley's protestations would have had greater effect if she had not casually suggested to Mavis only that morning that the car in question would be just the thing for her down at her Devonshire home. Major Barfield plunged in heavily to effect a diversion. "Well, how about your carryings on with the tortoise-shell puss up at the stables, eh?" The moment he had said it, everyone realized his blunder. "One does not usually discuss these matters in public," said Tobermory frigidly. "From a slight observation of your ways, since you've been in this house, I should imagine you'd find it inconvenient if I were to shift the conversation to your own little affairs." The panic which ensued was not confined to the Major. "Oh, would you like to go and see if cook has got your dinner ready?" suggested Lady Blemley hurriedly, affecting to ignore the fact that it was at least 2 hours to Tobermory's dinner time. "Thanks," said Tobermory, "not quite so soon after my tea. I don't want to die of indigestion." "Well, cats have 9 lives, you know," said Sir Wilfrid heartily. "Possibly," answered Tobermory, "but only 1 liver." "Adelaide," said Mrs. Cornet, "do you mean to encourage that cat to go out and gossip about us in the servants' hall?" The panic had indeed become general. A narrow ornamental balustrade ran in front of most of the bedroom windows at the towers, and it was recalled with dismay that this had formed a favourite promenade for Tobermory at all hours, whence he could watch the pigeons and heaven knows what else besides. If he intended to become reminiscent in his present outspoken strain, the effect would be something more than disconcerting. Mrs. Cornet, who spent much time at her toilet table and whose complexion was reputed to be of a nomadic though punctual disposition, looked as ill at ease as the Major. Miss Scrowen, who wrote fiercely sensuous poetry and led a blameless life, well, merely displayed irritation. If you are methodical and virtuous in private, you don't necessarily want everyone to know it. Bertie Van Tan, who was so depraved at 17 that he had long ago given up trying to be any worse, turned a dull shade of a gardenia white. But he did not commit the error of dashing out of the room like Odo Finsbury, a young gentleman who was understood to be reading for the church and who was possibly disturbed at the thought of scandals he might hear concerning other people. Clovis had the presence of mind to maintain a composed exterior. Privately, he was calculating how long it would take to procure a box of fancy mice through the agency of the Exchange and Mart as a species of hush money. Even in a delicate situation like the present, Agnes Resker could not endure to remain long in the background. "Oh, why did I ever come down here?" she asked dramatically. Burberry immediately accepted the opening. "Oh, judging by what you said to Mrs. Cornet on the croquet lawn yesterday, you were out of food. You described the Blemleys as the dullest people to stay with that you know, but said they were clever enough to employ a first-rate cook. Otherwise, they'd find it difficult to get anyone to come down a second time." "But there's not a word of truth in it. I appeal to Mrs. Cornet," exclaimed the discomforted Agnes. "Mrs. Cornet repeated your remark afterwards to Bertie Van Tan," continued Tobermory, "and said, 'That woman is a regular hunger marcher. She'd go anywhere for 4 square meals a day.' And Bertie Van Tan said—" Well, at this point the chronicle mercifully ceased. Tobermory had caught a glimpse of the big yellow Tom from the rectory working his way through the shrubbery toward the stable wing. In a flash, he had vanished through the open French window. With the disappearance of his too brilliant pupil, Cornelius Apin found himself beset by a hurricane of bitter upbraiding, anxious inquiry, and frightened entreaty. The responsibility for the situation lay with him, and he must prevent matters from becoming worse. Could Tobermory impart his dangerous gift to other cats? That was the first question he had to answer. It was possible, he replied, that he might have initiated his intimate friend, the stable puss, into his new accomplishment, but it was unlikely that his teaching could have taken a wider range as yet. "Well, then," said Mrs. Cornet, "Tobermory may be a valuable cat and a great pet, but I'm sure you'll agree, Adelaide, that both he and the stable cat must be done away with without delay." "Oh, you don't suppose I've enjoyed the last quarter of an hour, do you?" said Lady Blemley bitterly. "My husband and I are very fond of Tobermory. At least we were before this horrible accomplishment was infused into him. But now, of course, the only thing is to have him destroyed as soon as possible." "Well, we could put some strychnine in the scraps he always gets at dinner," said Sir Wilfrid. "But my great discovery," expostulated Mr. Appin, "after all my years of research and experiment." "You can go and experiment on the shorthorns at the farm, who are under proper control," said Mrs. Cornet, "or the elephants at the zoological gardens. They're said to be highly intelligent, and they have this recommendation, that they don't come creeping about our bedrooms and under chairs and so forth." An archangel ecstatically proclaiming the millennium, and then founding that it clashed unpardonably with Henley and would have to be indefinitely postponed, could hardly have felt more crestfallen than Cornelius Apin at the reception of his wonderful achievement. Public opinion, however, was against him. In fact, had the general voice been consulted on the subject, it is probable that a strong minority vote would have been in favor of including him in the strychnine diet. effective train arrangements and a nervous desire to see matters brought to a finish prevented an immediate dispersal of the party. But dinner that evening was not a social success. Agnes Reskin ostentatiously limited her repast to a morsel of dry toast, which she bit as though it were a personal enemy, while Mavis Bellington maintained a vindictive silence throughout the meal. Lady Blemley kept up a flow of what she hoped was conversation, but her attention was fixed on the doorway. A plate full of carefully dosed fish scraps was in readiness on the sideboard, but the sweets and savoury and dessert went their way, and no Tobermory appeared in the dining room or kitchen. The dinner was cheerful compared with the subsequent vigil in the morning. Eating and drinking had at least supplied a distraction and cloak to the prevailing embarrassment. Bridge was out of the question in the general tension of nerves and tempers, and after Odo Finsbury had given a lugubrious rendering of Melisande in the Wood to a frigid audience, music was tacitly avoided. At 11, the servants went to bed, announcing that the small window in the pantry had been left open, as usual, for Tobermory's private use. Lady Blemley made periodic visits to the pantry, returning each time with an expression of listless depression, which forestalled questioning. At 2 o'clock, Clovis broke the dominating silence. He won't turn up tonight. He's probably in the local newspaper office at the present moment, dictating the first installment of his reminiscences. Having made this contribution to the general cheerfulness, Clovis went to bed. At long intervals, the various members of the house party followed his example. The servants, taking round the early tea, made a uniform announcement in reply to a uniform question. Tobermory had not returned. Breakfast was, if anything, a more unpleasant function than dinner had been. But before its conclusion, the situation was relieved. Tobermory's corpse was brought in from the shrubbery, where a gardener had just discovered it. From the bites on his throat and the yellow fur which coated his claws, it was evident he had fallen in unequal combat with the big Tom from the rectory. By midday, most of the guests had quitted the towers, and after lunch, Lady Blemley had sufficiently recovered her spirits to write an extremely nasty letter to the rectory about the loss of her valuable pet. Tobermory had been Epon's one successful pupil, and he was destined to have no successor. A few weeks later, an elephant in the Dresden Zoological Garden, which had shown no previous signs of irritability, broke loose and killed an Englishman who had apparently been teasing it. The victim's name was variously reported in the papers as Opin and Eppelin, but his front name was faithfully rendered Cornelius. Oh, if he was trying German irregular verbs on the poor beast, said Clovis, he deserved all he got.
Thank you, Cleo. Our next story is by Alice Dunbar Nelson. Alice Dunbar Nelson was an American poet, journalist, and political activist, writing mainly in her home city of New Orleans around the turn of the last century. Among the first generation born free in the South after the Civil War, she was one of the prominent African Americans involved in the artistic flourishing of the Harlem Renaissance. She achieved prominence as a poet, author of short stories and dramas, newspaper columnist, activist for women's rights, and the editor of 2 anthologies. The next tale, I'm sorry, I've got this out of order. I beg your pardon.
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. All right, the next tale, A Story of Vengeance, is taken from her collection of stories and poems called Violets and Other Tales, published in 1895. The story will be read by Pamela Lampert.
A Story of Vengeance, Alice Dunbar Nelson. Yes, Eleanor, I have grown grayer. I'm younger than you know, but then what have you to age you? A kind husband, lovely children, while I am nothing but a lonely woman. Time goes slowly, slowly for me now. Why did I never marry? Move that screen a little to one side, please. My eyes can scarcely bear a strong light. Bernard? Oh, that's a long story. I'll tell you if you wish. It might pass an hour. Do you ever think to go over the old school days? We thought such foolish things, didn't we? There wasn't one of us but imagined we would have only to knock ever so faintly on the portals of fame, and they would fly wide for our entrance into the magic realms. On commencement night, we whispered merrily among ourselves on the stage to see our favorite planet, Venus, of course, smiling at us through a high open window, bidding adieu to her astronomy class, we said. Then you went away to plunge into the most brilliant whirl of society, and I stayed in the beautiful old city to work. Bernard was very much en evidence those days. He liked you a great deal, because in schoolgirl parlance, you were my chum. You say, thanks, no tea. It reminds me that I'm an old maid. You say you know what happiness means. Maybe, but I don't think any living soul could experience the joy I felt in those days. It was absolutely painful at times. Byron and his counterparts are ever dear to the womanly heart, whether young or old. Such a man was he. Gloomy, misanthropical, tired of the world, with a few dozen broken love affairs among his varied experiences. Of course, I worshipped him secretly. What romantic, silly girl of my age would not, being thrown in such constant contact with him? One day, he folded me tightly in his arms and said, "Little girl, I have nothing to give you in exchange for that priceless love of yours, but a heart that has already been at another's feet, an wrecked life, but may I ask for it?" "It is already yours," I answered. Well, I'll draw the veil over the scene which followed. You know, you've been there. Then began some of the happiest hours that ever the jolly old sun beamed upon, or the lovesick moon clothed in her rays of silver. Deceived me? Oh, no, no. He admitted that the old love for Blanche was still in his heart, but that he had lost all faith and respect for her and could never more be other than a friend. Well, I was fool enough to be content with such crumbs. We had 5 months of happiness. I tamed down beautifully in that time, even consented to adopt the peerless Blanche as a model. I gave up all my most ambitious plans and cherished schemes because he disliked women whose names were constantly in the mouth of the public. In fact, I became quiet, sedate, dignified, renounced too some of my best and dearest friends. I lived, breathed, thought, acted only for him. For me, there was but one soul in the universe, Bernard's. Still, for all the suffering I've experienced, I'd be willing to go through it all again, just to go over those 5 months. Every day together, at nights on the lake shore, listening to the soft lap of the waters as the silver sheen of the moon spread over the dainty curled waves, sometimes in a hammock, swinging among the trees, talking of love and reading poetry. Talk about heaven. I just think there can't be a better time among the angels. But there is an end to all things. A violent illness and his father relenting sent for the wayward son. I will always believe he loved me, but he was eager to get home to his mother and anxious to view Blanche in the light of their new relationship. We had a whole series of parting scenes, tears and vows and kisses exchanged. We clung to each other after the regulation fashion and swore never to forget and to write every day. There was a final wrench, and I went back to my old life, he away home. For a while, I was content. There were daily letters from him to read, his constant admonitions to practice, his many little tokens to adore, until there came a change. Letters less frequent, more mention of Blanche and her love for him, less of his love for me, until the truth was forced upon me. Then I grew cold and proud, and with an iron will crushed and stamped all love for him out of my tortured heart and cried for vengeance. Yes, quite melodramatic, wasn't it? It is a dramatic tale, though. So I threw off my habits of seclusion and mingled again with men and women and took up all my long forgotten plans. It's no use telling you how I succeeded. It was really wonderful, wasn't it? It seems as though that fickle goddess, Fortune, showered every blessing, save one, on my path. Success followed success, triumph succeeded triumph. I was lionized, feted, petted, caressed by the social and literary world. You often used to wonder how I stood it in all those years. God knows, with the heartsick weariness and the fierce loathing that possessed me, I don't know myself. But mind you, Eleanor, I schemed well. I had everything, seemingly, that humanity craved for, but I suffered. And by all the gods, I swore that he should suffer too. Blanche turned against him and married his brother. An unfortunate chain of circumstances drove him from his father's home, branded as a forger. Strange, wasn't it? But money is a strong weapon, and its long arm reaches over leagues and leagues of land and water. One day he found me in a distant city and begged for my love again, and for mercy and pity. Blanche was only a mistake, he said, and he loved me alone, and so on. I remembered all his thrilling tones and tender glances, but they might have moved granite now sooner than me. He knelt at my feet and pleaded like a criminal suing for life. I laughed at him and sneered at his misery and told him what he had done for my happiness and what I, in turn, had done for his. Eleanor, to my dying day, I shall never forget his face as he rose from his knees and with one awful, indescribable look of hate, anguish, and scorn, walked from the room. As he neared the door, all the old love in me rose in me like a flood, drowning the sorrows of past years and overwhelming me in a deluge of pity. Strive as I did, I could not repress it. A woman's love is too mighty to be put down with little reasonings. I called to him in terror, "Bernard, Bernard!" He did not turn, gave no sign of having heard. "Bernard, come back, I didn't mean it." He passed slowly with bent head out of the house and out of my life. I've never seen him since, never heard of him. Somewhere, perhaps on God's earth, he wanders, outcast, forsaken, loveless. I have my vengeance, but it is like Dead Sea fruit, all bitter ashes to the taste. I am a miserable, heart-weary wreck, a woman with fame, without love. Vengeance is an arrow that often falleth and smiteth the hand of him that sent it.
Thank you, Pamela. We're going to take a pause right now, and I want to bring back Chris Edwards and talk to you a little bit about Eventide and what we plan on doing in the upcoming months.
Sure, sure. Thanks, Toby. So, first of all, great readings from Toby and Pamela. I'm looking forward to the next readings as well. Always a treat. I love hearing these stories. They're always new. They're always fresh. Even if they're ones that I'm familiar with, I just love hearing everyone's take on them. So well done. And Toby, thank you for putting this program together. Yet again, knocking it out of the park. Um, for those of you who are enjoying this at home and would like to consider supporting us and making a contribution, you can do so by texting our theater's initials, ETC, to the number 44321. That'll bring you to a secure link where you can make a donation. Speaking of donations and sponsorships, I do also want to mention we have also, Toby mentioned a number of the cultural councils that are supporting our program. I also want to mention Dennis and Chatham have also stepped forward and helped support this programming. So this really is a cross-Cape venture. And this programming has just really garnered support just across all of the upper, lower, and mid-Cape. And it's just wonderful to see such an outpouring of support from our community and from the individuals who are supporting us. We are making some big strides into 2021. We're very, very excited about this. In fact, the next time you join us for Eventide Tales is going to be a little bit different. We recently premiered our video show, our winter showcase, which was streamed live on Zoom for our Playwrights, Etc. Playwrights Lab. It was sort of the pinnacle of that program, and they did a fantastic job. And one of the things that we found was that the quality of the programming and the quality of the stream seemed to be so much better doing it that way. So we've decided we're going to try and take this experiment a little further. So next time you will still be able to find us by clicking on Facebook, but it's going to take you someplace different. We're not going to do it through Facebook Live. It's actually going to bring you through a link into our living room, for all intents and purposes, into our Zoom room. And there you'll be able to experience it very much in the same way that you're experiencing it now, but with better quality and more consistency, which is what we're always striving to do. In addition to that, Eventide has announced our 2021 season, and it's very exciting because unlike 2020, where so many of our theater and our sister theaters had to table their programming, we're moving forward this year. We are promising to present and deliver all 4 slated productions of our season. Now, that does require us to make a few adaptations. The first 2 shows are going to be virtual only. The first production, Teacher of the Year, was written by Jim Daglish, who is the head of our Playwrights, Etc. Playwrights Lab, and it's specifically written online, and it's specifically written about the pandemic. It's going to be a great experience for you folks to join us for. We are co-producing this show with Cotuit Center for the Arts, and David Keene has been a great supporter of ours. He's done a magnificent job over at Cotuit, and he's really just gone out of his way to partner with us to make this extraordinary production, which we're very, very excited about. It's going to be offered in 12 episodes over 12 days. You can join us episodically each day, or you can join us on the last day and watch them all. It's really a unique experiment for us. The second show that we're going to be doing this season is called Twain by the Tale, and it's going to be featuring one of our readers today, a man who I like to say is the best Mark Twain interpreter since Hal Holbrook. He is directing and starring in the show, and it is going to be produced by Toby, who's leading our Eventide Tales here. That is going to be done in a very unique way as well. It is also going to be available online. It's going to be streamed, and it's going to be done, if everything goes the way we're planning it, by using a green screen technology, which should be very creative and very inventive, and again, is really thinking out of the box for the folks at this little community theater, and I'm so proud of everything we're doing. Not to ramble on, but the rest of our season is going to look a little more familiar. We're going to be returning to the main stage. It looks very promising. Everything seems to be in line. So coming up in September, Steve Ross, one of our favorite directors, is going to be returning to direct The Last 5 Years, featuring some very familiar faces. And then our second production is going to be Ha by Rich Arloff, which will be directed by Toby. And it's a return from a playwright, Rich, who was the writer of Radio Ridiculous, which was a wonderfully fun, zany, ludicrous show we did back before all this stuff happened. We're so excited to be able to do one of his works again. It always carries with it a bunch of laughs, and it's always a lot of fun. And Lord knows at the end of this year, by the end of this year, that is exactly what we need. So we're really excited about our season. If things change and take a turn in a way that is not quite so positive, we will still deliver these shows. If we have to bring them outside, if we have to find a way to stream them, we will present them. Our season will go on. The show show will go on, and we invite you to join us as we move forward as well. That said, we're looking forward to you joining us for our Eventide Tales program starting in March again through our different streaming format. You won't notice anything different, except you just got to follow a different link, and we're hoping to see you join us there. With that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Toby, and thank you so much for letting me be a part of your afternoon.
Thank you, Chris. Our next story is by a contemporary writer named Mary Mccluskey. Her prize-winning short stories and essays have been published in Salon.com and in The Atlantic, The London Magazine, Story Quarterly, London's Litro, and other literary journals in the United States and the United Kingdom. Mccluskey specializes in first-person stories told by an unreliable narrator, a characteristic you will see in one of her best tales, A Gift to the Dark Gods. This will be read by Janet Geist-Moore.
The tap on her shoulder freezes her. The quiet warning voice in her ear is exactly what she has feared. In a small, dark place inside herself, she's prepared for both. She had not expected a teenager. "Come with me, please, madam," the young man says, his back stiff with self-importance. He's young enough to be her son, young enough to be one of the troubled youths she tutors in the small charity-run literacy program in the suburbs. She's tutoring a boy now. He has a tattoo on his forehead that spells hate, and his eyes dart around the room, alert for predators. This young man, though, also dark-skinned and mixed race, keeps his eyes averted. He is smooth-suited and smells of fresh citrus cologne as he grips her arm and leads her to the manager's office. The manager is tired, and he lowers his pale lashes when he asks to see her ID, as if asking for something intimate, inappropriate. Then he turns to his computer. Helen swallows. This is new. As he scrutinizes the screen, then types something into the computer, fear knots her chest. Her name is now accessible to every major store in the city. The next time she is caught, she will be arrested and booked. No question. "Is that legal?" she asks. "Storing information on someone who hasn't even been charged?" "You want to call your husband?" he replies with a tiny smile. "Or a lawyer?" "My husband is a lawyer," Helen says. The manager blinks rapidly. The smile vanishes. The young man who had escorted her from the jewelry department leans against the door and makes a small groaning sound. "He'll be very angry if I call him," Helen says. "At me or at you. I'm afraid he's likely to make a big fuss about wrongful arrest." They understand her. She knows they haven't called the police yet. She's carrying a fat wad of cash in her purse, 4 credit cards, including a Platinum American Express, and their own valued customer card. She wears an emerald ring, an anniversary gift from her husband. The diamond studs in her ears are 1 carat each. She is easily able to pay for the designer scarf and the hard plastic earrings in the shape of sunflowers she was seen to stuff into her bag. Helen knows that what most disturbs them is that these are 2 different items from 2 separate counters. But she always steals 2 items. That's one of her rules. It has to be 2 items from 2 different counters, from the same floor of the same store. But they want to let her go. They don't want trouble. Perhaps if I pay for these things now, she asks. When she reaches her car, Helen is shaking too hard to insert the key into the car door. She stands still, taking deep, gulping breaths, willing herself to calm down. That was too close. They almost called Daniel. The thought makes her lightheaded. Her husband is a man of principle and firm opinions, a strong man, which is why she married him. He seemed the type of man who would take care of her, and he has. But his view of the law is simple and punitive. He thinks that teenage gang members who commit murder should be executed, that 14-year-old thieves should be tried as adults. Only yesterday, they had disagreed over a youth arrest for stealing a bottle of cider in a local off-license. It was an initiation thing, Helen had said. His mother's a crackhead. He wants to be part of the gang. He wants a family. Daniel had given her a long look. He's probably been unhappy and hungry all of his life, Helen added. Nobody's hungry in this country, Daniel said. He actually believed it. You heard of benefits? Helen thought of the people in the literacy program, young and old, struggling with so many demons. Hunger was not unknown, though her teenage pupils were more likely to eat badly than not at all. Their problems went far beyond an inability to read or write. Daniel knows little about the literacy program. He believes she teaches pensioners how to use a computer. He would not understand Amanda, the girl who carries a kitchen knife to make small cuts in her wrists when she's stressed, or Zach, the boy with hate tattooed on his forehead. When she first met Daniel, he was studying law, and she was passionately involved in a course on writing and madness. She would quote Rimbaud, Breton, Artaud, Foucault. He teased her for taking this foreign literature seriously. He made her feel stupid for liking it, stupid for understanding it. An irony that did not occur to her until much later. There are many things, she admits now, that Daniel does not understand. Things that are gray with edges that department store. In the newly decorated bedroom of her immaculate suburban home, Helen places the earrings and scarf in the locked trunk with other shoplifted items. There are hundreds of them now, many hundreds. She calls them her gifts to the dark gods. She knows that it is the dark gods who turn the wheels of a tricycle and send the toddler screaming into traffic. The dark gods who guide children to falling fences, hidden currents, and smiling strangers with death in their black hearts. She cannot afford to stop now after such a soft, uneventful life. Who knows what vengeance the dark gods might take? She can't remember exactly when it began. It was soon after Chloe and Nick left for university, when she quit her job at the advertising company, when she became, as Daniel describes her, a lady of leisure. We can afford it, sweetheart. Do charity work or something. No need for you to stress out in advertising. It started in Marks and Spencer's food hall. She stole a chocolate bar at the counter. A week later, she took a magazine. It grew to 2 items a week. The rules gradually became more complex and demanding. The rule now is 2 items a week by Friday, 3 in the afternoon. The items have to be from the same store, on the same floor, and they have to be different. 2 scarves, for example, won't do. Today's items, the pretty scarf, the silly earrings, don't qualify because she has to pay for them. The problem now is that she's behind. She is 2 items behind, and it is already Thursday. Tomorrow, then, at the mall. Meet me for lunch tomorrow, Daniel asks as they have dinner. That client we met at the Algarve, John Stanton, he's in town with his wife. Helen stares. Tomorrow, she repeats. Where? Oh, the blank place. He studies her expression. Busy day? He asks. Hair appointment? He laughs. There's a strange pride in the way he teases her about her empty, frivolous days. He is the sole breadwinner now. No problem. The blank place it is, she says. But Helen is seething. That means the local mall is out. That means it has to be the city center again. She was there last week when that middle-aged businessman followed her around. She knew he was a plainclothes security. He had the look. She was carrying her Debenhams bag. She always carries a department store bag with a number of purchased items inside it, a basic rule. And she was dressed well and carrying a good quality handbag. Her new one is Italian and black linen, full of expensive clues to background and breeding, intimidation. The guy hadn't been intimidated, though. He stayed close. In the city center the following day, Helen avoids Harvey Nicks, too many close calls there, and heads for House of Fraser. A lanky kid in sweats shoots up from nowhere. He is behind her as she enters the store. He's still there at the jewelry counter. She is certain he is security. She's learned to spot them. Helen avoids looking at him. She picks up a scarf, replaces it, studies earrings, bracelets, tries one of them on her wrist, then puts it back. He waits, watching. When she takes the escalator, he is 4 people behind her. Lingerie will smoke him out. She knows that. It's worked well before. Plainclothes store detectives stand out in the red satin thongs and French bra department. But he's behind her. She can feel him. She glances at her watch and catches her breath. She's almost out of time. She has to be at the restaurant in half an hour. May I help you, madam? Asks the salesgirl. She's a sweet Barbie doll of a girl, about Chloe's age. Security kid must have alerted her. Just looking, Helen smiles. Panic starting in her chest. Her heart begins pounding. She's not going to be able to do it. The kid stands only 10 yards away, and he is watching openly. She meets his gaze and tries to smile. Hello there, she says. He turns away. She is 10 minutes late to the restaurant, and Helen is damp with fear. It is Friday and already 1:30 p.m. It'll have to be items from the restaurant. Knives, forks, salt shakers. She's done it before, but it is awkward, and this is her husband's client. John Stanton and his wife, Barbara, are already seated at the table, sipping aperitifs. Barbara has the kind of drink no one orders in the city anymore, a martini with an olive. His looks like a scotch. Daniel regards her with some disapproval. Sorry, she says, traffic. She shakes hands and smiles, but she is starting to tremble. She's running out of time. It will soon be too late. Barbara Stanton has the perfectly manicured and coiffed look of the suburban matron. A generation ago, her type of woman would have had blue hair. Her hair is streaked blonde, her chin tucked, her skin spa-pampered. She smiles, a white, wide smile. Lovely to meet you, she says. The men talk business. The women chat about children. The competition is equally fierce on both ends of the table. Your daughter's at Cambridge, asked Barbara. Yes, Chloe's choice, and Nick at Edinburgh Medical School. As far away from home as they could get. You have 2 sons? Yes, both Oxford, says Barbara, her smile victorious. They exchange photographs, making admiring noises. Oh, Chloe looks just like you, Barbara says. Helen cannot see it. Her bright, lovely daughter, Chloe, so confident, so creative. She's amazed that she produced these children. The gene pool had obviously sucked more from Daniel's side during their formation. All the classy traits from his patrician Berkshire family are visible. Her own working class genes are not in evidence. Helen lifts the fish knife, turns it over, and places her hand over it. The waiter appears with salad and takes the knife away with a swift, smooth stroke. Too late. They are too efficient here. She looks at the dessert spoons. Possibly, possibly. She is sweating. Her blouse is sticking to her back, and she can feel her hair, damp, curling against her neck. Her heart is starting to pound, a hard, nauseating pounding. Panic attacks, her therapist, Martha King, calls them. Terrifying, but temporary, she has said to Helen when they first began. I think I'm going to die. That's how it feels. No one dies of panic attacks. Stay calm until it passes. Helen has not told Martha the reason for these attacks. The stealing, the rigid rules about the stealing is something she has never shared with anyone. How could Martha, with her small, empathetic smile, understand about dark gods? When the waiter asks about dessert, Helen pretends an interest only to keep the silverware on the table. She studies the menu. Chocolate mousse, creme caramel. She looks up, and so quickly that she wants to cry out, the waiter is there and the silverware is gone. The table is bare. Helen looks at him. Decided? The young man asks. Oh, nothing, thank you. She knows her mouth is trembling. Excuse me. In the ladies' room, she stands at the sink, fighting the nausea. It is 15 minutes to 3. It would be awful to vomit. She hates that. She splashes cold water on her face. She is ashen, her eyes wide with fear. In the mirror, suddenly, she sees Barbara Stanton's face. Are you all right, my dear? Barbara asks. You turned so white in there. Fine, fine, thank you, Helen says weakly. You're not pregnant, are you? Lord, no, too old for that. Menopause more likely. Is that it? You look so young. Helen continues staring into the mirror as Barbara disappears into the stall. Barbara has left her purse on the counter. Helen takes a breath, listens. Every nerve ending on red alert. The purse is soft kid leather, black, with a silver snap clasp. Helen opens it. You get hot flashes too, calls Barbara. Yes, sometimes. Oh, St. John's wort, dear. Try it. Better than estrogen. Works like a charm. More natural. Helen is not listening. She's staring into the bag. A lipstick, Estee Lauder. She recognized the casing. She takes it. And what else? Fuck, what else? The bag is a tip. The toilet flushes. Helen grabs a tiny leather purse. It is tight in her fist when Barbara comes out of the stall and begins to rinse her hands. She smiles at Helen. Helen catches sight of herself in the mirror. Her eyes are round, sparked with fear. She has realized that the tiny purse curled in her palm surrounds sharp metal. Something is protruding. Car keys. Oh, shit. They will turn the place upside down. Barbara must have driven here, must have parked her car outside. They'll search the place. Helen drops the car keys on the floor. Oh, she says, her voice too high. You dropped something. That's yours? Barbara still has her hands under the tap. She looks at Helen, then glances at her bag. It is lying on its side, closed. Helen had snapped it shut automatically. Barbara dries her hand slowly, then stoops down to pick up the little purse containing the car keys. She opens her bag, looks into it, running her finger along her lower lip. Then she turns to Helen. She studies Helen for a long moment. There is no censure in her look, only sympathy. What were you looking for, my dear? Barbara asks finally. Is there a problem? For just a moment, Helen hesitates. It would be so easy to say, yes, yes, there is a problem, as she has not been able to say to Martha Kim or even to her husband. But she shakes her head. What do you mean? Does your husband know about this? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. He should. He could help you find counseling before it becomes... There is a pause while she thinks of the right word. Public. She snaps her bag closed and looks hard at Helen. Someone should mention it to him, she says quietly as she walks out. Helen stands still for a few minutes, trying to curb the shaking, fumbling in her bag for Valium. She finds only paracetamol and takes 3 of those. Anything will do, anything. When she walks back to the restaurant, only Daniel sits there. The Stantons leave? She asks. Yes, had to rush. Is that woman a bit loopy? She said you were distressed. You had issues to discuss. He stares at her, astounded. I sent John off to get the car, for Christ's sake, then whispers in my ear, talking some psychobabble crap. He shakes his head. She left you her card. Daniel picks up a business card. You don't want it, do you? I'd avoid her if I were you. Helen shakes her head, and he tears up the card and throws it into the tiny saucer that holds a candle. Ready to go? he asks. Helen nods her head, but she's barely listening. All she can think is that it is 2 minutes to 3, and she has only the lipstick. Only the lipstick. She's an item short. She is one fucking item short. She lifts the napkin as if to wipe her mouth, but the waiter is beside her, holding her chair, helping her up. The napkin has to go back on the table. On her way to the door, Helen begins to shake. She can feel the shaking from her knees right up to her hair. So hard and strong, she is shuddering, and her head trembles on her neck. Fast, impulsively, she lifts a small vase from a table near the bar. It contains daisies. Helen sniffs them. She does not look at anyone. Staring straight ahead, she puts the whole thing into her bag. Vase, water, flowers, everything, and keeps walking. She begins to breathe again. The trembling slows. It is then that Helen notices her skirt is damp. She pauses. Water drips from her soft linen bag onto the carpeting, onto her shoes. Helen thinks of the mess inside her bag. She imagines her wet driver's license, her sodden checkbook, the photographs of her children, the card from Chloe, all destroyed by the water from the vase. It is lunacy. Helen stops. Daniel, she calls, and he turns. He's holding the door for her. Wait, hold this. She hands Daniel the bag. She does not want to drip all the way back through the restaurant. He frowns. What's this? Did you drop this thing in the toilet? I forgot something, she says. Helen walks swiftly back to the table, praying it will still be there. The 2 pieces of the card are curling in the saucer. She places them together. Barbara Stanton, interior designer. Well, why not? A start. Maybe a friend. When she gets outside, Daniel is pacing the pavement. He holds her bag in front of him at arm's length so it does not drip on his suit. He stares at her. What's going on? He asks. She shrugs, meets his eyes. His frown is deepening. Fear and worry are on his face, but the irritation is gone. Is there something the matter, Helen? Helen slides Barbara Stanton's card into her pocket so that it is safe and dry, and then reaches for her dripping bag. With her fingers, she traces the outline of the small vase inside the bag, still there, still intact. Her last, her very last gift to the dark gods. No, I'm fine, she says. I'll be fine.
Thank you, Janet. Our last story today is by Mark Twain, who was known as Samuel Langhorne Clemens. He was an American writer, humorist, entrepreneur, publisher, and lecturer. His most popular work is familiar to all Americans. William Faulkner even called him the father of American literature, despite the fact that he dropped out of school in 5th grade to earn money to help his family. Twain was born shortly after an appearance of Halley's Comet, and he predicted that he would go out with it as well. He died the day after the comet made its closest approach to Earth. The next story is one of Twain's best-known short works, the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. The story will be read by Stephen Rourke.
The celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County by Mark Twain. In compliance with the request of a friend of mine who wrote me from the East, I called on good-natured, garrulous old Simon Wheeler and inquired after my friend's friend, Leonidas W. Smiley, as requested to do, and I will convey the result to you. I have a lurking suspicion that Leonidas W. Smiley is a myth, and that my friend never knew such a personage, and that he only conjectured that if I asked old Wheeler about him, it would remind him of his infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me to death with some exasperating reminiscence of him as long and as tedious as it should be useless to me. Now, if that was his design, it succeeded. I found Simon Wheeler dozing comfortably by the barroom stove of the dilapidated tavern in the decayed mining camp of Angels. I noticed he was fat, bald-headed, and had an expression of winning gentleness and simplicity upon his tranquil countenance. He roused up and gave me good day. I told him a friend had commissioned me to make some inquiries about his cherished companion of his boyhood named Leonidas W. Smiley, Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, a young minister of the gospel, who he had heard was at one time a resident of Angel's Camp. I added that if Mr. Wheeler could tell me anything about this Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, I would feel under many obligations to him. Now, Simon Wheeler backed me into a corner and blockaded me there with his chair, and then sat down and reeled off the monotonous narrative which follows. He never smiled. He never frowned. He never changed his voice from the gentle flowing key to which he tuned his initial sentence. He never betrayed the slightest suspicion of enthusiasm, but all through the interminable narrative there ran a vein of impressive earnestness and sincerity, which showed me plainly that so far from his imagining that there was anything ridiculous or funny about his story, he regarded it as a really important matter, and admired its two heroes as men of transcendent genius in finesse. I let him go on his own way and never interrupted him once. Reverend Leonidas W. Reverend, well, there was a fella here once by the name of Jim Smiley in the winter of 49, or maybe it was the spring of 50. I don't recall exactly somehow. What makes me think it was one or the other is because I remember the big flume weren't finished when he first came to the camp. But anyway, he was the curiousest man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see, if he could get anybody to bet on the other side. And if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Anyway, that suited the other man, would suit him anyway, just so's he's got a bet. He was satisfied. But still, he was lucky, uncommon lucky. He most always came out a winner. He was always ready and laying for a chance. There couldn't be no solitary thing mentioned, but that feller'd offer to bet on it and take any side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a horse race, you'd find him busted at the end of it. Or if there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there was two birds setting on a fence, he would bet you which one would fly first. Or if there was a camp meeting, he would be there regular to bet on Parson Walker, which he judged to be the best exhorter about here. And he was, too, and a good man. If he ever see a straddlebug start to go anywheres, he would bet you on how long it would take him to get to wherever he was going to. And if you took him up, he would follow that straddlebug to Mexico, but what he would find out where he was bound for and how long he was on the road. Now, lots of the boys here have seen that Smiley and could tell you about him. Why, it never made no difference to him. He'd bet on anything. He'd bet on anything, the dangest feller. Parson Walker's wife laid very sick once for a good while, and it seemed as if they weren't going to be able to save her. But one morning he come in, and Smiley up and asked him how she was. And the parson said she was considerable better, thank the Lord for his infinite mercy, and coming on so smart that with the blessing of Providence, she'd get well yet. And Smiley, before he thought, says, well, I'll risk 2.5 she don't anyway. This year, Smiley had a mare. The boys called her the 15-minute nag, but that was only in fun, because, of course, she was faster than that. And he used to win money on that horse for all she was so slow and always had the asthma or the distemper or consumption or something of that kind. They used to give her 200 or 300 yards start and then pass her underway. But always at the fag end of the race, she'd get excited and desperate-like and come cavorting and straddling up and scattering her legs around limber, sometimes in the air, sometimes out to one side amongst the fences, and kicking up more dust and raising more racket with her coughing and sneezing and blowing her nose, and always fetch up at the stand just about a neck ahead as near as you could cipher it down. And he had a small bull pup that to look at him you'd think he warn't nothing worth a cent, but to sit around and look ornery and lay for a chance to steal something. But as soon as money was up on him, he was a different dog. His underjaw began to stick out like the forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and shine like the furnaces. And a dog might tackle him and bullyrag him and bite him and throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times. And Andrew Jackson, which was the name of the pup, Andrew Jackson would never let on but what he was satisfied and hadn't expected nothing else, and the bets being doubled on the other side all the time till the money was all up. And then all of a sudden he would grab that other dog just by the joint of his hind leg and freeze to it. Not chaw, you understand, but only just grip and hang on till they throw it up the sponge if it was a year. Smiley always come out winner on that pup. Till he harnessed a dog once that didn't have no hind legs because they'd been sawed off in a circular saw. And when the thing had gone along far enough and the money was all up and he come to make a snatch for his pet Holt, he see in a minute how he'd been imposed on and how the other dog had him in the door, so to speak. And he appeared surprised. Then he looked sort of discouraged like and didn't try no more to win the fight. So he got shucked out bad. He gave Smiley a look as much as to say his heart was broke, and it was his fault for putting up a dog that hadn't no hind legs for him to take hold of, which was the main dependence in his fight. But then he limped off a piece and laid down, and he died. It was a good pup. Was a good pup, was that Andrew Jackson, and he would have made a name for himself if he'd lived, for the stuff was in him, and he had genius. I know it because he hadn't no opportunities to speak of, and it don't stand to reason that a dog could make such a fight as he could under them circumstances if he hadn't no talent. It always makes me sorry when I think of that last fight of his and the way it turned out. Well, this year Smiley, he had rat terriers and chicken cocks and tomcats and all of them kind of things till you couldn't rest. And you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on, but he'd match you. He catched a frog one day, took him home, said he calculated to educate him. And so he never done nothing for 3 months but sat in his backyard and learn that frog to jump. And you bet you he did learn him too. He'd give him a little punch from behind, and the next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a donut. See him turn one somerset, or maybe a couple if you get a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right, like a cat. He got him up so in the matter of catching flies, and kept him in practice so constant that he'd nail a fly every time as far as he could see him. Smiley said all a frog wanted was education, and he could do most anything. And I believe him. Well, I seen him set Daniel Webster down here right on this floor. Daniel Webster, that's the name of the frog. And sing out, "Flies, Daniel, flies." And quicker than you could wink, he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off in that counter there. And he'd flop down on the floor again, solid as a gob of mud, and fell to scratching his side of his head with his hind foot, as indifferent as if he had no idea he'd been doing any more than any frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was, for all he was so gifted. And when it come to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground at one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit. And when it comes to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellas that had traveled and been everywheres, all said he laid over any frog that they ever see. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him downtown sometimes and lay for a bet. Well, one day a fellow, a stranger in the camp he was, come across him with the box and says, "What might be that you got in the box?" And Smiley says, sort of indifferent, like, "Hey, it might be a parrot, might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog." And the fella took it and looked at it, careful, and turned it round this way and that and says, "So it is. Well, what's he good for?" "Well," Smiley says, easy and careless, "he's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." The fellow took the box again and took another long, particular look and gave it back to Smiley and says, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no pints about that frog that's any better than any other frog." "Maybe you don't," Smiley says. "Maybe you understand frogs and maybe you don't understand them. Maybe you've had experience and maybe you ain't only an amateur, as it were. Anyways, I got my opinion, and I'll risk $40 that he can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." The fellow studied a minute and then says, kind of sad like, "Well, I'm only a stranger here and I ain't got no frog. But if I had a frog, I'd bet you." And then Smiley says, "That's all right, that's all right. If you hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog." And so the fellow took the box, put up his $40 along with Smiley's, and sat down to wait. So he sat there a good time while thinking and thinking to himself. And then he got the frog out and prized his mouth open and took a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot, filled him pretty near up to his chin, and set him down on the floor. A Smiley, he'd gone to the swamp and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he catched the frog and fetched him in and gave him to this feller and says, "Now, if you're ready, set him alongside Dan'l with his forepaws just even with Dan'l's, and I'll give the word." Then he says, "1, 2, 3, get!" And him and the fella touched up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off lively. But Dan'l give a heave and heisted up his shoulders so, like a Frenchman. But it weren't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as a church, and he couldn't no more stir than if it was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted too, but he didn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. Well, the fella took the money and started away, and when he was going out the door, he sort of jerked his thumb over his shoulder so at Dan'l and says, again, very deliberate, well, he says, "I don't see no points about that frog that's any better than any other frog." Well, Smiley, he stood scratching his head and looking down at Dan'l a long time, and at last says, "I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off for. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He appears to look mighty baggy somehow." And he catched Dan'l up by the nape of the neck and hefted him and says, "My blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds," and turned him upside down, and Dan'l belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was. And he was the maddest man. He set the frog down and took out after that fella, but he never catched him. And here, Simon Wheeler heard his name called from the front yard and got up to see what was wanted. And turning to me as he moved away, he said, "Just set where you are, stranger, and rest easy. I ain't going to be gone a second." But by your leave, I did not think that a continuation of the history of the enterprising vagabond Jim Smiley would be likely to afford me much information concerning the Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, and so I started away. At the door, I met the sociable Wheeler returning, and he buttonholed me and recommenced. "Well, this here Smiley, he had a yaller, one-eyed cow that didn't have no tail, only just a short stump, like a banana? However, lacking both time and inclination, I did not wait to hear about the afflicted cow, but took my leave.
Thank you, Stephen. I want to thank all of our readers today, Cleo Zanni, Janet Geismore, Pamela Lambert, and Stephen Rourke. Thank you very much for joining with us today. Our next program is going to be on March 13th. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to our actors.